So I actually have a question to start off for the three of you. Coming from an education background myself, so working with kids on a regular basis, I was wondering if the three of you have ever worked with or have an example of best practices for encouraging the next generation into your fields. So a great example of how children are getting involved in gardening, a great example of how children can learn a little bit about biophilic design even if they're interested in architecture, or how to get children involved in this concept of a city of awe. What are some examples of programs you've seen that get the next generation involved in your specific area?
So from my field, what I've seen is, so one of the things that we did when we were working on the gardens, some of the information that I was showing, some of the data that we got
on community gardens, we also went into school gardens. So we do have a lot of school gardens now where children use those as outdoor classrooms. And I've actually had an experience where I have visited some of the gardens and interacted with the kids. I remember there's a rooftop garden which is like 0.6 miles from our campus, and we took some of our students there during spring cleanup, and they had kids who were, their parents were working out, and so they were, daycare, and we had them out, and they were into the soil and, digging out worms. They were so excited. And so sometimes I think we, presenting our kids with that opportunity of going outside the classroom and engaging them in being curious and exploring the environment really helps them to catch them at an early age so that they know. And some people might argue, we don't have a space to do, to establish a garden at our school. Get them outside, look at the trees, look at the plants, look at the soil. I think that's a good starting point for them to get interested, because once you take them out, they show interest, they are curious, and that has been part of my experience on this.
Well, I'll just add, we have a wonderful schoolyard garden programs in Charlottesville, but to me, it's a real challenge thinking of it from the perspective of a architecture school educator. We have lots of ideas. We don't do a very good job, I think, cultivating an interest in design at an early age. We actually have a bachelor's degree in architecture and urban planning, and we do have people coming in from high school, but we should really be in elementary school challenging students to think about what a city of awe or what a biophilic city could be like and should be like. And we keep thinking we're going to come up with some kind of block, some kind of tool that would make that easier. But so that they know about how gardens are important in a city, and we need to think about growing food and green rooftops and every other thing that we thinking about bats and birds and all those things at an early age. Those are natural and important things to have in a city and in urban life. So love your ideas about how to do that, but we should probably be working more closely with kids at a much earlier age to cultivate that design interest. So.
Well, my 10-year-old has known the word biophilic design since she was like 4. She's like, Mom, you're doing that crazy biophilic design stuff again. Most of my experience, is with college students and emerging high school design students that are thinking about design. And I always introduce it by making it personal. So it's that visioning, like, where's your place? What are your objects? What matters most to you? If they can hold on to that and think about that and connect with that, then the whole world opens up. Then they're thinking about it and imagining that with possibilities. And as far as K through 12, I love programs and experiences that merge nature with art. I love that creativity. We need more art anyway. It gets creative juices going. So that's always my favorite work to do with them.
Mural projects, all kinds of wonderful plays.
Great, thank you all. I actually had one question that was interesting that's for all of you. Do you feel like a sense of awe could diminish over time?
Well, I guess I'm the awe person today, but yeah, I think it's a challenge to keep that fascination, that curiosity going throughout life. It's got to be cultivated at a young age, and I think that's really the idea of having a culture of awe, where we're reinforcing it, we're nudging a little bit, but we're also, like the nature guides, we're giving people lots of chances to recharge their sense of awe over time and see the value and benefit of doing that. And it shouldn't be something that you have to think about so much. It should just be, integrated into the places you live, and you should be, sort of have the attitude of being open to those awe-inspiring moments. But ebbs and flows, I guess, over time, right? Kids are particularly, I think, open to like that example from the Atlantic, from the Miami Nature Center. There are moments in time when you might peak, but trying to sustain it is a really important challenge.
I would say, coming from a perspective when maybe we're looking at food, I just remembered that on one of the slides I had, one of the things that I did find out in Tanzania was people shunning the indigenous foods, and I did find also from my research in Zimbabwe that it's kind of the same thing. So the young people are, wanting, the processed foods, the fast food kind of growing in Zimbabwe. But then I guess when we revisit, okay, so we have all these problems, in agriculture, and how can we do it better when we talk about sustainability? I think once we are, removing those layers, looking at those native plants that we used to grow, looking at the different connections, we can have moments where, we can bring back the owl, right? So when I went to that garden and I saw the clay pots that this lady had as part of the irrigation practice that was used many, many thousands of years ago in North Africa, I was like, wow, I didn't know about this. And so I think we can, as we are bringing back some of those things that we have kind of discarded as far as, for example, in agriculture, it can bring also that awe and, get us going and knowing more about, how some of the things that we used to do.
That was my question. So.
All right, and I've actually there's a number of questions that have this general theme. But one of the questions that seems to keep appearing is not everyone experiences nature positively. For some folks, it's they more associate nature with frightening experiences. So what are some baby steps that we could take to help people feel more comfortable in nature if they have not had previously positive experiences in the outdoors?
That's a good question. So I always take my kids when I go to the garden visits. And one of the things that I can say, talking about how some people are uncomfortable, it's, when you see the bugs, the bees, I'm like, yes, but, it's in some instances, just even seeing the spiders, the bugs out there, some people are not comfortable. And sometimes we think, people who are interested in science, in nature, are the ones that can actually venture outside. But I can say even your backyard, starting with your backyard, what's out there, and take those baby steps. I used to have a 10 by 10 foot garden, small garden, but then I would notice people passing through our yard, and they would say, oh wow, what do you have? And so you can take those small steps. Maybe start with that flower pot, you start with maybe a flower, and then move on to maybe a tomato in a potted plant, and move and take those baby steps. I think that helps, because sometimes just doing it on a bigger scale may be terrifying for some people.
Yeah, and I recognize not everyone loves ants, so or other things in nature, and there is that aspect of wildness, there is a little bit of fear and danger, and it's part of what we actually want in a wild urban environment. But yeah, baby steps. I think it's actually awe is something experienced and enjoyed collectively. So often having groups of folks who you dangle that come on along, and with others who educate and entice and convey their enthusiasm. Those are some of the strategies that help. But it's also a little bit. You don't want to be out with the lightning, but you want to be enjoying the lightning from the safety of a room maybe and watching it. So there are ways of balancing the danger and the wonder and the awe. So.
I would say that it's important that the exposure is just comfortable and safe if we're trying to look for a more positive response. So like a park setting versus maybe completely in the wild, start slower. And I love the idea of working in groups and with other people, so there's that encouragement. I think the discussion is really important, so there's awareness. Wow, this is the experience and this is what I'm feeling. Or maybe if there's encouragement that others are feeling okay, then that's going to start building this more positive reinforcement.
It's interesting. I might just add the example of this of walking out with the fifth graders into the Atlantic Ocean. For some of those kids, they had their parents along, and it was really interesting. The kids were just ready, and they were charging into the water, but the parents were really apprehensive, and they're worried about what's going to bite them or what are they going to find in that water, and I'm not sure what this means, but that sort of openness to wonder at a younger age is a point of entree for older people, I think, and for parents. And so there are ways to get at that, nudge folks into experiencing that wonder.
Another recurring question that's been coming up is how can we make biophilic design accessible and make sure we're not creating barriers for different populations through biophilic design? How can we make it accessible for all?
So it's really important that those voices are brought to the table from day one and they're listened to. So I think a lot of times they might even be in the room and they're not really heard. And sometimes that takes going to them and asking those questions and asking about their experiences. And a lot of the work we've been doing, we try to build off that foundation of understanding what the underserved and the underprivileged are experiencing and what they need and what it means to support equity and being inclusive. But in the workshops where we're envisioning the possibilities around biophilic design for projects, we also work with personas so that the teams are actually kind of disconnecting from their heads and they're moving into what another's experiences would be in and around that building. And that helps people kind of align and understand deeply in another way what someone else might go through. And what they might experience and how we can be most responsive to those needs. So I think get out of our heads, get into our hearts more.
Yeah, very good. I just might add at the city level, lots of wonderful work going on, thinking about accessibility from that city scale. So cities that are setting the goal of everyone within a 5 to 10 minute walk of a park, or having some minimum level of forest canopy cover. I think we really have to sort of think about it that way. And we have some wonderful emerging stories. We have a film about Cully Park in Portland, a park in a neighborhood of color that was underserved, and a process of actively engaging, not telling the neighborhood what kind of nature they wanted or should want, but rather asking them and actually giving them the power to design and plan that park. And I think those models are really important.
Yeah, yes, and I think that your last statement also applies even when we are looking at gardens, community gardens, for example. That understanding what the different people want, and I was also thinking about there's an article that I came across which was talking about even why certain people do not participate. So sometimes, in underserved neighborhoods or minority neighborhoods. And I've seen this where, you have a garden and then you don't really see, people coming in. They're not like, yay, we have a garden, we can get, even if it's open. And why is it? So I guess taking some time to get into that and understanding, what is really going on as well, so that everyone is on board. And it's something that is collective that, the community welcomes. So, sometimes we have assumptions. I remember when I started this, about 4 years ago, starting getting into communities, trying to understand how, what is happening with community gardens. So one thing that really struck me was I was talking to one lady, and she said, a lot of people feel like, they don't want to get into it because it takes them back to the sharecropping mentality. And it really struck me coming from Zimbabwe, where we always had, the backyard gardens. And I thought, even to this day, that people still have that mentality. And so maybe unpacking some of those things that, people might have, rather than just, coming in and say, we have this great idea, let's do this. But it is something that has to come from the people and really address their needs. Because sometimes, with the different gardens as well, some people might be wanting to focus on something that is more culturally based, right? Depending with what they are growing. So they might be into, the herbs and things like that are tied to their culture. And so when we come in and say, oh, well, let's do the green peppers and the tomatoes, that might not necessarily be something that they're open to. So all those things, once you pull people together, you can actually get into understanding how you can design and promote that as well.
Actually, while you have the mic, we had one question that was, do you know of any community gardens in elder care facilities or gardens that are specifically meant to encourage cross-generational interactions? So getting children together with their community elders, or encouraging respect with shared interest?
Yeah, actually, the garden that I did visit in the summer, they had they are actually a few of those gardens where you can have that generational gap. You have kids coming in, and so this one is actually on a church property, and it's adjacent to a living senior living facility. And so I was talking to the garden coordinator, and he was saying, what, I'm thinking of having, they had a meeting, and he was saying, I'm thinking of having even flowers for people who are visiting the senior living facility. They can grab some flowers and take them to their mom or dad or grandma. But also saying that I think the way you design it in such a way that it's addressing, it pulls in the different age groups, right? And so even, some people who are elderly, they might need some raised beds that are where they can access when they are on a wheelchair and things like that. So I've certainly seen a few gardens that have that incorporated in their design that way. And so thinking at of the community as a whole, not leaving people behind.
I might just extend that to other things, nature things in cities, and I've just been working on a book about birds in cities, and I'm frequently asking bird conservation leaders how they got started and why they love birds, and it frequently ties to someone, a grandmother or a grandfather or a parent. There is definitely a really important intergenerational connection there, and that we have to figure out clever ways of making those connections or for facilitating that intergenerational discussion. But that love of nature is something that can be passed along, and at the same time, for older folks, you get the recharge of seeing the world through in a new way through those young eyes. So I think that's a really important thing to foster, that intergenerational and interage kind of dynamic. Yeah.
Well, my examples are, of course, closer to home in Phoenix, but there's a lot of community gardens that have more of the senior community that works them on the weekends, and the schools work them during the school days. But there's always special opportunities for the students to come in over the weekend and bring their families in and talk to their parents about what they're learning. And I've observed the children at my daughter's school really starting to engage and learn. And there's just kind of this natural mixing that seems to happen in these opportunities. They're not aware of it by any means, but you can just see if you're observing it, kind of that connection and how rich it is.
I just want to add that even so, like I live in the South Hills area. I've noticed also, so under even the community gardens, that there are some schools that are opening it up to. So we have, the school gardens separate from the community gardens, but there are school gardens where they are opening it up to the community, so the parents can come in and help with whatever they are doing, and even going into cooking demos as well. And so in that instance, you are bringing the different age groups, so the kids are involved in in mainly the maintenance, but they also pull in the community as well, and so you have that mix so that no one is kind of left out.
We frequently say that biophilic cities are cities that represent a whole of life exposure to nature. So it's kids in their early ages, but throughout your life. So I'm thinking of people like, I don't know if you know Jane Rao, who is a 94-year-old trail guide in Scottsdale, actually at the Sonoran McDowell Preserve, and she goes, it's an element of meaning and an important aspect of her life, but she leads groups of kids into the desert and showing them, identifying cacti and flora and fauna, and that's we need to, particularly later in life, as I'm getting later in life, I'm realizing that can be a really meaningful thing to be doing, and it's a tremendous opportunity.
In the desert, it's what not to touch.
Great, and we are actually just about at time, so our very last question will be a super quick one. Sonja, what was that book that you mentioned at the very end of your presentation?
Tim, did you ask that question? That was Biophilic Design, and it's Kellert, Heerwagen, and Maher. So it was chapter 1. I like all the contributions in that book are wonderful, but that first chapter had me so.
It's still the single best book, I think, for biophilic design.
Great. Can we give our speakers a round of applause?